Admiral Hayes stood at the massive window of the space station, watching Earth turn slowly below. The blue marble looked peaceful from here, but he knew that peace was about to end. The communication device on his desk buzzed with an incoming message from the Galactic Council. He had been expecting this call for weeks. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a tall figure with gray skin and 4 arms. The creature's voice was cold and mechanical. Admiral Hayes of the human species. I am High Chancellor Vorak of the Galactic Council. Your species has been warned many times. You have refused to comply with our demands. This is your final notice. Hayes crossed his arms and stared at the alien. What demands are those, Chancellor? Your military must be reduced to planetary defense only. Your expansion into other star systems must stop. Your aggressive behavior toward other species must end. You have 72 hours to surrender all military assets beyond your home system. The Admiral felt his jaw tighten, and if we refuse, then your species will be eliminated. We have done this before. 47 other species have learned the cost of defying the Council. Their worlds are now dust. The transmission ended abruptly. Hayes turned to his aide, a young officer named Roberts. Get me President Carter on the emergency channel. Alert all fleet commanders. And contact the Lunar Defense Grid. Within minutes, the President appeared on screen from the White House. Admiral, I saw the transmission. What's our situation? Not good, sir. Our deep space sensors show over 3,000 ships gathering at the edge of our solar system. They're massive, each one the size of a city. We have maybe 200 vessels that can fight in deep space. President Carter rubbed his temples. What about our allies? The trade partners we've made? Council controls most of the galaxy. Sir, any species that helps us will face the same fate. We're alone in this. Across the planet, emergency broadcasts began. People gathered around screens in their homes, offices, and public spaces. The message was simple but terrifying. Humanity faced extinction if they did not surrender within 3 days. Dr. Williams, a quantum physicist working at the Particle Accelerator facility in Geneva, watched the broadcast with her team. They want us to give up everything we've built, she said quietly. Our colonies, our ships, our freedom. Her colleague, Dr. Anderson, shook his head. Maybe we should consider it. Look at those numbers. 3,000 ships against 200. You don't understand, Williams replied. I've studied the Council's history. When they say reduce military to planetary defense, they mean we become slaves. Every species that has surrendered has been turned into servants or workers. They don't want peace. They want control. Similar conversations were happening everywhere. In the orbital shipyards above Mars, workers debated whether to keep building warships or start packing to leave. In the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, families wondered if they should evacuate back to Earth. Captain Reynolds was leading a patrol near Jupiter when the order came through all fleet channels. All ships return to defensive positions. Immediately, this is not a drill. His small fighter squadron had been checking the outer system for threats. Now they were racing back toward Earth. Captain, his wingman called over the radio, are we really going to fight them? Those ships are huge. Reynolds looked at the tactical display showing the enemy fleet. Each Council ship was 10 times larger than anything humans had built. We fight, he said simply, because the alternative is worse than death. The Council fleet moved closer, stopping just beyond the orbit of Pluto. Their message was clear: surrender or face annihilation. To demonstrate their power, they targeted a small moon in the outer system. The energy beam that struck it was visible. From Earth, the moon simply vanished, turned to dust in seconds. The psychological impact was immediate. Panic spread through some cities. Stock markets crashed. Some politicians called for immediate surrender. But something else was happening. 2. In military bases, factories, and homes around the world, people were getting angry. Commander Brooks, head of Earth's intelligence service, was monitoring communications from around the globe. Sir, she reported to Admiral Hayes, we're seeing something interesting. The initial panic is giving way to determination. Recruitment centers are being flooded with volunteers. Hayes nodded. Humans don't like being bullied. President Carter called an emergency session of the World Council. Representatives from every nation gathered in the massive assembly hall. The debate was heated but brief. Some argued for negotiation, others for partial compliance. But when the final vote was called, it was unanimous. The president addressed the world that evening. Behind him stood military leaders, scientists, and representatives from every continent. His words were simple. The Galactic Council has demanded our surrender. They want us to abandon our colonies, destroy our ships, and submit to their rule. Our answer is no, we don't kneel. The reaction was immediate. Across the planet, people cheered. In the orbital stations, workers returned to their jobs with new purpose. In the fleet, sailors prepared for battle with grim determination. General Foster, commanding the ground forces, activated the planetary defense network. Hidden missile silos opened on every continent. Orbital platforms that had been disguised as civilian stations revealed their true nature as weapons platforms. The asteroid mining operations began converting their equipment into weapons factories. The Council's response came 12 hours later. High Chancellor Vorak appeared on all human communication networks. You have chosen extinction. Your species will serve as an example to others who might consider defying the Council. The attack begins in 24 hours. But humanity was already moving. Dr. Williams and her team began converting the particle accelerators into weapons. The shipyards worked around the clock to arm civilian vessels. Children were evacuated from the orbital colonies while their parents stayed to fight. Captain Reynolds and his squadron were assigned to the outer defense perimeter. Their job was to slow down the initial assault, buying time for the main fleet to prepare. He knew it was likely a suicide mission, but he had volunteered anyway. Remember, Admiral Hayes told his fleet commanders in the final briefing, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to make them pay such a high price that they'll think twice about what they're doing, hit and run. Strike fast and disappear, make every shot count. As the final hours ticked away, Earth prepared for war. The Council expected a quick surrender after the first demonstration of their power. They had seen it 47 times before, but they had never faced humans. They had never faced a species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The countdown reached 0. In the darkness of space, 3,000 alien warships began their advance toward Earth. Behind them, the light of their engines looked like stars, but ahead of them, humanity waited. Earth didn't flinch. The Council's first wave struck Earth's outer defenses like a hammer blow. Captain Reynolds watched from his fighter as massive alien warships emerged from hyperspace near Neptune. Each one was the size of a mountain, bristling with weapons that could level cities. All squadrons, this is Control. Admiral Hayes' voice crackled through the radio. Remember the plan? Hit them fast, hit them hard, then get out. Don't try to slug it out with the big ships. Reynolds led his 12 fighters toward the nearest Council vessel. It was a Dracomori heavy cruiser, its hull covered in thick armor plates. The ship's massive guns tracked toward the small human fighters, but they were too slow. Reynolds' squadron darted between the energy beams, their small size making them difficult targets. Fire on my mark, Reynolds called out. His fighters carried experimental weapons that Dr. Williams' team had developed. Instead of trying to penetrate the alien armor, they targeted the ship's sensor arrays and communication systems. Mark! 12 missiles struck the cruiser simultaneously. The explosions looked tiny against the massive hull, but the effect was immediate. The ship's main guns stopped tracking properly, firing wild shots into empty space. Good hit, Reynolds reported. Target is blinded, moving to next objective. But the celebration was short-lived. 3 more Council ships had detected the human attack and were converging on the fighter squadron. Their weapons were smaller, but much faster than the main guns. Evasive maneuvers, Reynolds ordered. The fighters scattered, using their superior speed to avoid the alien fire. But one of his pilots, a young woman named Torres, was caught in a crossfire. Her ship exploded in a brief flash of light. "Torres is down," someone reported over the radio. "Keep moving," Reynolds replied, though. His heart was heavy. "We can't help her now." The pattern repeated across the outer system. Human fighters and small ships struck at the Council fleet, causing damage but paying a heavy price. For every alien ship that was disabled, humanity lost 5 or 6 vessels. General Thax, the Drakmori commander, watched the battle from his flagship. He had led the conquest of 12 worlds for the Council, and every previous enemy had fought the same way. They formed large fleets, met his ships in direct combat, and were destroyed by superior firepower, but the humans were different. They refused to engage in the traditional manner. Instead, they attacked like insects, stinging and retreating before his ships could respond effectively. It was frustrating and, he had to admit, somewhat effective. "Report," he demanded from his aide. "We have lost 37 ships to engine damage or sensor failures. The humans are targeting our support systems rather than trying to destroy us directly." Thax studied the tactical display. The human fleet was scattered across the system, refusing to mass for a decisive battle. They are cowards. They know they cannot win, so they delay the inevitable. But privately he was troubled. His ships were designed for overwhelming attacks against conventional fleets. The humans' guerrilla tactics were something his forces had never encountered. On Earth, Dr. Williams was working frantically in her laboratory. The particle accelerator facility had been converted into a weapons factory, producing the specialized missiles that the fighters were using. But she was working on something bigger. "The main accelerator ring is almost ready," she told her team. "We can turn it into a massive electromagnetic pulse weapon. It should be able to disable any ship." "Within 1,000 kilometers," Dr. Anderson looked worried. "Are you sure it will work? We only get one shot at this." "The theory is sound," Williams replied, "but you're right about only getting one chance. The energy discharge will destroy the entire facility." Meanwhile, the Council's ground assault was beginning. Massive transport ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, heading for major cities. The planet's surface defenses opened fire, filling the sky with missiles and energy beams. The first transport ship to reach New York was hit by surface-to-air missiles before it could land. The explosion lit up the night sky and burning debris rained down on the city below. But 2 more ships made it through the defensive fire. General Foster was coordinating the ground defense from his command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. "All units, engage the enemy as they land. Do not let them establish a foothold." The alien soldiers that emerged from the transport ships were unlike anything humans had seen. The Drakmori were tall, reptilian creatures with thick scales and powerful claws. They carried energy weapons that could cut through steel. But they moved slowly and seemed unprepared for the intensity of human resistance. The first battle took place in Central Park. A company of human soldiers, armed with conventional weapons, faced off against 50 Drakmori warriors. The aliens expected the humans to retreat after the first exchange of fire. Instead, the soldiers charged. Lieutenant Davis led his men in a desperate assault against the alien position. The Drakmori energy weapons were powerful, but they fired slowly and needed time to recharge. The human soldiers used this weakness. Rushing forward between shots, "Keep moving," Davis shouted. "Don't give them time to aim." The battle was vicious and chaotic. Human soldiers fell to alien weapons, but they kept fighting. When their rifles ran out of ammunition, they used knives and bare hands. The Drakmori, who had conquered dozens of worlds, had never faced such ferocity. The alien commander, a veteran of many campaigns, reported back to his ship. "The humans fight like wild animals. They show no fear of death. This is not normal behavior." Similar battles were taking place around the world. In London, civilians joined the fight, throwing homemade bombs from rooftops. In Tokyo, police and military worked together to trap alien soldiers in the subway tunnels. In Sydney, firefighters used their equipment to blind alien forces with foam and water. Captain Reynolds, meanwhile, had regrouped his surviving fighters for another attack. His squadron was down to 8 ships, but they had learned from the first engagement. This time, they approached the Council fleet from below, using Earth's magnetic field to mask their approach. "Target the big one," Reynolds ordered, pointing to a massive command ship. "If we can take out their communications, maybe we can cause some confusion." The attack was perfectly executed. The human fighters struck the command ship's communication arrays and then disappeared, before the alien gunners could respond. But the effect was greater than Reynolds had hoped. Without proper communication, 3 Council ships collided with each other while trying to change formation. Another ship, confused by contradictory orders, fired on one of its own allies. The rigid command structure that the Council relied on was breaking down. General Thax watched in growing alarm as his organized assault turned into chaos. The humans were not fighting like any species he had encountered. They seemed to prefer death to surrender, and their tactics were completely unpredictable. "Sir," his aide reported, "we have taken significant casualties. The humans are targeting our command and control systems. Our forces are becoming disorganized." Thax made a decision that would have been unthinkable a few hours earlier. "Pull back the first wave. Reform at the outer defense perimeter. We need to reassess our approach." The news of the Council's retreat spread quickly through the human forces. It was not a victory, but it was proof that the aliens could be hurt. More importantly, it was proof that they could be made to back down. Admiral Hayes received the reports with mixed emotions. Humanity had inflicted significant damage on the Council fleet, but the cost had been enormous. Nearly half of Earth's space-capable ships had been destroyed or damaged. The ground forces had held their positions, but several major cities had been badly damaged. "Status report," he requested from the staff. "We've lost 40% of our fleet," Commander Brooks reported. "Ground forces have taken heavy casualties but are holding. The Council has pulled back to regroup." Hayes nodded grimly. "How long before they attack again?" "Maybe 12 hours. They're probably analyzing our tactics and preparing countermeasures." But something else was happening that neither side had anticipated. Deep in space, far from the battle, other species were watching. The news that humans had actually fought back against the Council was spreading through hidden communication networks on the mining world of Kepler Station. Workers of the Vorthek species huddled around illegal communication devices. They had been slaves of the Council for 300 years, but now they were hearing something impossible. A species had actually resisted the Council's demands and survived the first assault. "Is it true?" asked an old Vorthek miner named Grun. "Did the humans really fight back?" His companion, a younger worker named Tech, nodded. "The signals are coming from human space. They're still broadcasting. They're still fighting." For the first time in centuries, the Vorthek felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. The news of Earth's resistance spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On worlds that had been conquered generations ago, people gathered in secret to share the impossible story. The humans had fought back against the Council and survived. Commander Brooks was monitoring deep space communications when she noticed something unusual. "Admiral, we're picking up coded transmissions from across the galaxy. They're not using standard Council frequencies." Admiral Hayes looked at the data streaming across her screen. "What are they saying?" "It's hard to decipher, but they seem to be talking about us, about Earth's fight against the Council." On the distant world of Altair 7, the Kalthani people worked in vast factories producing goods for the Council. They had been a proud trading civilization before the conquest, but 50 years of occupation had reduced them to industrial slaves. Now, in the depths of their underground cities, they whispered about the humans. Old Morik, a former ship captain who now supervised a manufacturing plant, gathered his workers around him during their brief rest period. "I have heard something that may interest you," he said quietly. "The humans have refused to surrender to the Council." A young worker named Kira looked skeptical. "That's impossible. No one fights the Council. They have too many ships, too much power." "That's what we thought," Morik replied. "But the humans are different. They would rather die than become slaves." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a Council overseer, a tall Drakmori with scarred scales. Back to work, he commanded. Production quotas must be met. But as the workers returned to their tasks, they carried with them a new idea. If the humans could resist, maybe others could too. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. In the bureaucratic centers where the Yulani species maintained the Council's administrative systems, clerks and officials quietly shared information. The Yulani had been reduced to a serval caste. Their natural intelligence used to keep the Council's vast empire running efficiently. Nara, a senior administrator on the Council's capital world, had access to military communication channels. What she read there made her hands tremble. The humans had actually damaged the Council fleet. Ships that had seemed invincible for 1,000 years had been forced to retreat. "This changes everything," she whispered to her assistant, a younger Yulani named Paul. "If the humans can hurt the Council, then the Council can be defeated." Paul looked around nervously. "Don't talk like that. If the overseers hear you, we'll be sent to the punishment facilities." But Nara was already thinking ahead. The Yulani had access to the Council's communication networks, their supply routes, their military deployment schedules. If they chose to share that information with the humans, it could make a significant difference. Back on Earth, the human forces were preparing for the next assault. Dr. Williams had completed her work on the particle accelerator weapon, but she knew it would only be effective once. General Foster was reinforcing the ground defenses, while Admiral Hayes tried to repair and rearm what remained of the fleet. "Sir," Captain Reynolds reported, "we're down to about 60 space-capable fighters. The big ships are mostly gone." Hayes nodded grimly. "We'll have to make do with what we have. The Council won't give us time to rebuild." But then something unexpected happened. A small ship appeared at the edge of the solar system, broadcasting human identification codes. It was moving fast, clearly trying to avoid detection by the Council fleet. "This is the merchant vessel Dawn's Light," came the transmission. "We carry medical supplies and volunteer crew. Requesting permission to land." Hayes was puzzled. "Where are you from, Dawn's Light?" "Altair 7, sir. We're Calthani." "We've come to help." The small ship was indeed carrying medical supplies, but more importantly, it carried information. Captain Morick, who had stolen the vessel from his former captors, brought with him detailed intelligence about Council ship designs and tactics. "Your weapons are targeting the wrong systems," he explained to the human commanders. "The Council ships have redundant armor, but their power distribution networks are vulnerable. Hit them here and here," he pointed to specific locations on the ship. "Schematics, and you can disable them with much smaller weapons." Admiral Hayes studied the information carefully. "Why are you helping us?" Morick's expression was sad, but determined. "Because we remember what it was like to be free. My people were traders and explorers before the Council came. Now we are factory workers and slaves. If you can defeat them, perhaps we can be free again." The arrival of the Calthani ship was just the beginning. Over the next few days, more vessels appeared. They were mostly small craft, smuggler ships, and modified freighters, but they brought something more valuable than weapons: hope. A group of Vorthek miners had stolen a transport ship and brought rare metals that could be used to repair the human fleet. A team of Yulani administrators provided detailed maps of Council fleet positions and supply routes. Even some members of other species, ones that had been conquered so long ago that their names were almost forgotten, found ways to help. Commander Brooks was coordinating with these new allies when she made a startling discovery. "Admiral, we're not the only ones fighting. There are uprisings starting on dozens of worlds. The Council is having to divert ships from our system to deal with rebellions elsewhere." General Thax was facing exactly this problem. His superior, High Chancellor Vorak, was demanding immediate victory against the humans, but reports were coming in from across the galaxy. The Vorthak had seized control of 3 mining stations. The Calthani had sabotaged 2 major industrial complexes. Even the normally passive Yulani were beginning to resist their overseers. "The humans have infected the galaxy with their madness," Vorak declared during a council meeting. "They must be destroyed immediately before this rebellion spreads further." But Thax was beginning to understand something that his superiors did not. The humans were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for an idea that intelligent beings should not be slaves to others. And that idea was spreading faster than the Council's ability to suppress it. On Earth, the human leaders were realizing the same thing. President Carter met with Admiral Hayes and the other military commanders to discuss the situation. "We're not fighting alone anymore," he observed. "This has become something bigger than just Earth's survival." "Yes, sir," Hayes agreed. "But it also means the Council will be more desperate. They'll throw everything they have at us to end this quickly." The prediction proved accurate. Within hours, the Council fleet began its second assault on Earth. But this time, they were not facing just human resistance. Calthani ships provided early warning of the attack. Yulani intelligence gave the defenders detailed information about the enemy's plans. Vorthek volunteers helped repair and modify human weapons. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The Council's ships, armed with the lessons learned from the first assault, targeted the human fighters more effectively. But the humans had learned too. They used the information provided by their alien allies to strike at the Council ships. Weak points. Dr. Williams watched from her control center as the particle accelerator weapon prepared to fire. The Council's main assault force was approaching Earth's orbit, confident that they could overwhelm the planet's defenses. They had no idea what was waiting for them. "Fire!" she commanded. The energy pulse that erupted from the accelerator facility was invisible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate and devastating. Every Council ship within 1,000 kilometers suddenly went dark. Their weapons stopped firing, their engines shut down, their communication systems failed. "Direct hit," someone reported. 15 Council ships disabled, but the victory came at a cost. The particle accelerator facility was destroyed by the enormous energy discharge, and Dr. Williams and her team barely escaped with their lives. The weapon could not be used again, however, the psychological impact was enormous. The Council's seemingly invincible fleet had been crippled by a single human weapon. Across the galaxy, the species that had been watching the battle saw proof that the Council could be defeated. On the mining world of Kepler Station, the Vorthek workers finally acted. Led by the old miner Grun, they overpowered their guards and seized control of the facility. "The humans have shown us the way," Grun declared. "Now we must show ourselves worthy of freedom." Similar uprisings erupted on dozens of worlds. The Council's rigid control structure, based on fear and overwhelming force, began to collapse as subject species realized that resistance was possible. General Thax received the reports with growing alarm. "Sir, we're facing rebellions on 47 worlds. Our forces are stretched too thin to contain them all." High Chancellor Vorak's response was predictable. "Destroy them all. Make examples that will terrify the others back into submission." But Thax was beginning to wonder if that was still possible. The humans had done something that no other species had managed in 1,000 years. They had shown that the Council could be hurt. And that revelation was spreading faster than the Council's ability to suppress it. The galaxy was awakening from a long sleep, and the flames of rebellion were beginning to burn on every world. The rebellion exploded across the galaxy with a speed that shocked even the humans who had started it. What began as Earth's desperate stand had become a galactic revolution, and the Council's 1,000-year reign was crumbling. Lieutenant Commander Price stood on the bridge of the human cruiser Defiance, watching as a mixed fleet of rebel ships prepared for their next assault. Beside the remaining human vessels flew Calthani freighters converted into warships, Vorthek mining ships armed with improvised weapons, and even a few Yulani courier vessels carrying intelligence equipment. "Status report," she requested from her communications officer. "We've got uprisings confirmed on over 200 worlds," the officer replied. "The Council is pulling ships from the Earth assault to deal with the rebellions, but they can't be everywhere at once." Price nodded. The human strategy had evolved from simple survival to something much more complex. They were now coordinating with rebel groups across the galaxy, sharing intelligence and resources. The scattered resistance movements were becoming a unified force on the Vorthek mining world of Terminus 7. The rebellion had taken a different form. The miners, led by Grun and his young Lieutenant Tech, had not only seized control of their facility but had begun converting it into a weapons factory. Their knowledge of mining equipment was proving invaluable in creating improvised weapons for the rebellion. The humans were right, Grun told his assembled workers. Freedom is worth fighting for, even if we die trying. The old miner had become an unlikely leader, organizing not just his own people but coordinating with other Vorthak colonies throughout the sector. His mining experience had taught him how to move resources efficiently, and now he was applying those skills to warfare, but the Council's response was swift and brutal. High Chancellor Vorak had decided that examples must be made. The peaceful Delrani species, who had simply declared neutrality in the conflict, found their homeworld surrounded by Council warships. Surrender your planetary defenses and return. To Council authority, came the demand. You have 1 hour to comply. The Delrani had no military forces to speak of. They were philosophers and artists, a species that had never known war. Their leader, an elderly female named Sira, broadcast a simple message to the galaxy. We seek only peace. We have harmed no one. The Council's response was to reduce the Delrani homeworld to radioactive ash. The bombardment lasted 3 hours. And when it was over, an entire species had been wiped from existence. The message was clear: neutrality was not an option, but the Council's brutality had the opposite effect from what they intended. Instead of terrorizing other species into submission, the destruction of the Delrani homeworld fueled the rebellion's anger. Species that had been considering surrender now fought with renewed fury. On Earth, the news of the Delrani massacre reached the human leadership as they planned their next move. President Carter's face was grim as he addressed the War Cabinet. They're not just trying to defeat us, he said. They're trying to terrorize the entire galaxy into submission. General Foster slammed his fist on the table. Then we make them pay for every world they destroy. We hit them so hard they won't have the ships to keep doing this. The human military leadership had been planning a major offensive, but the Delrani massacre accelerated their timeline. Working with their alien allies, they identified the Council's primary staging area, the fortress world of Zentara Prime. Zentara Prime was the symbol of Council power, a massive military installation that had never been successfully attacked. Its orbital defenses were legendary, and its garrison included the elite troops of a dozen species. But intelligence provided by the Yulani showed that the Council had been forced to redeploy many of their ships to deal with the spreading rebellions. It's still heavily defended, Commander Brooks warned as she briefed the assault force. We're talking about a fortress that's held off attacks for over 1,000 years. Admiral Hayes studied the tactical displays. What do we have for the assault? 60 human ships, mostly fighters and light cruisers. The Calthani are providing 40 modified freighters. The Vorthak have 30 mining vessels with improvised weapons. The Yulani are giving us intelligence support. The numbers were still daunting. Zentara Prime's defenses included over 300 orbital platforms and a garrison fleet of 200 warships. But the rebels had advantages that previous attackers had lacked: detailed intelligence, coordinated tactics, and most importantly, nothing left to lose. The assault began with a diversionary attack on the outer system's mining facilities. Council forces moved to intercept what they thought was a raid on their supply lines. But the real target was the fortress itself. Captain Reynolds, now commanding one of the few remaining human cruisers, led the main assault force through the asteroid field that surrounded Zentara Prime. The rebels had learned from the Vorthak miners how to use the asteroids as cover, hiding their approach until the last moment. All ships, remember the plan, Reynolds broadcast to the mixed fleet. We're not trying to destroy the fortress, we're trying to capture it. The Council needs to see that their most powerful symbols can fall. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The Council's defenders fought with the confidence of 1,000 years of victory, but the rebel forces fought with the desperation of the oppressed. Calthani ships rammed Council vessels when their weapons failed. Vorthak miners used their knowledge of explosives to devastating effect. Human fighters darted between the massive orbital platforms, targeting their weak points. The fortress's defenses were formidable, but they had been designed to repel conventional attacks. The rebels' tactics were anything but conventional. They used suicide runs, coordinated swarm attacks, and even rammed damaged ships into key installations. General Thax, who had been recalled from the Earth campaign to defend Zentara Prime, watched in horror as his defenses crumbled. "How are they doing this?" he demanded from his staff. "They're primitives and slaves." His aide, a young Drakmori officer named Kex, looked at the tactical displays with growing alarm. "Sir, they're not fighting like any enemy we've faced. They're coordinating between species, sharing information in real time. It's like they're all part of one unified force." That was exactly what was happening. The rebellion had evolved beyond simple resistance. The different species were learning to work together, combining their strengths to overcome the Council's advantages. Human tactical skills, Kalthani engineering knowledge, Vorthek industrial expertise, and Yulani intelligence. Capabilities were creating a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The turning point came when a group of Vorthek miners, led by Tech, managed to breach the fortress's main power station. Using the same techniques they had developed for mining operations, they planted explosives at key points throughout the facility. "All ships, get clear," Tech broadcast. "We're bringing down the whole station." The explosion was visible from orbit. The fortress's main power grid failed, and with it, half of the orbital defenses. The rebel fleet pressed their advantage. Pouring through the gap in the defenses, General Thax made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "All ships retreat. We cannot hold the fortress." The fall of Zentara Prime sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Council's most powerful symbol had fallen to a ragtag force of rebels. Species that had been loyal to the Council for centuries began to question their allegiance. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Nearly half of the rebel fleet had been destroyed or damaged. Among the casualties was Tech, the young Vorthik who had led the assault on the power station. His last transmission had been simple: "Tell my people they are free." The psychological impact of the victory was enormous. Across the galaxy, species that had been watching the conflict began to actively join the rebellion. The Council's authority was collapsing as world after world declared independence. Nara, the Yulani administrator who had been secretly helping the rebels, finally acted openly. Using her access to the Council's communication networks, she broadcast a message to every world in the galaxy: "The Council's power is broken. The time for freedom has come." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Military commanders refused orders to suppress rebellions. Civilian populations rose up against their occupiers. Even some of the Council's own forces began to defect, unwilling to continue fighting for a cause that seemed increasingly hopeless. High Chancellor Vorak, faced with the collapse of his empire, made a desperate decision. "Gather all remaining forces," he ordered. "We make one final assault on Earth. If we can destroy the source of this rebellion, we can still salvage our authority." But the galaxy was already burning. The rebellion had spread far beyond Earth's ability to control or coordinate. The idea of freedom, once planted, was growing everywhere. The Council's 1,000-year reign was ending, and no single victory could restore it. The final battle was coming, but it would be fought by a galaxy united against oppression. The flames of rebellion had spread too far to be extinguished. 2 years had passed since the Council's first ultimatum to Earth. The galaxy was unrecognizable from what it had been. Where once the Council's iron grip had maintained order through fear, now dozens of independent worlds fought for their freedom. But the war was far from over. High Chancellor Vorak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching as the remnants of his once mighty fleet gathered for what he knew would be the final battle. Around him floated the last loyal forces of the Council, 300 warships drawn from across the galaxy. "Status report," he demanded from his aide. "All remaining forces have arrived, Chancellor. We have ships from 12 systems, including the Drakmori Home Fleet and the Core Guard squadrons. Vorak nodded grimly. It was a fraction of what the Council had possessed 2 years ago, but it was still a formidable force. More importantly, it was concentrated in one place, something the scattered rebel fleets could not match. "Set course for Earth," he commanded. "We end this where it began." The Council's strategy was simple but desperate. If they could destroy Earth, they might be able to shatter the rebellion's morale and convince other species to return to Council authority. It was their last hope of maintaining power, but Earth was no longer the isolated world that had first defied the Council. Admiral Hayes, now older and bearing the scars of 2 years of warfare, stood in the command center of the rebuilt orbital defense station. Around him, officers from a dozen different species worked side by side, coordinating the defense of humanities. Homeworld. "Incoming transmission from the outer pickets," reported Commander Brooks. "The Council fleet has entered the system. 300 ships, moving in standard formation." Hayes studied the tactical display. The numbers were daunting, but he was not the same man who had faced the Council's first ultimatum. 2 years of warfare had taught him that victory was not always about having the most ships. "Signal all allied fleets," he ordered. "This is what we've been preparing for." The response was immediate and overwhelming. From across the solar system, ships began converging on Earth's position. But these were not just human vessels. The fleet that gathered to defend Earth represented every species that had joined the rebellion. Captain Reynolds, now commanding a mixed squadron of human, Kalthani, and Vorthak ships, led the outer defense perimeter. His hair was gray now, and he had lost his original ship in the battle for Zentara Prime, but his determination was stronger than ever. "All ships, remember what we're fighting for," he broadcast to his diverse fleet. "Not just Earth, but every world that wants to be free." The Kalthani had brought their converted merchant vessels, now armed with weapons designed by human engineers. The Vorthak contributed their heavy mining ships, which had proven surprisingly effective as assault vessels. The Ulani provided intelligence and communication support, coordinating the movements of hundreds of ships in real time, but perhaps most surprisingly, the rebel fleet included defectors from the Council's own forces. Drakmori commanders who had grown sick of serving an empire built on oppression. Minor species who had been conscripted into Council service and now fought for their freedom. Old Morik, the Kalthani captain who had been among the first to help Earth, commanded a squadron of ships from his homeworld. At his side flew vessels crewed by former slaves who had never imagined they would live to see this day. "The humans kept their promise," he told his crew as they prepared for battle. "They said they would rather die than surrender. Now we have the chance to prove we feel the same way." General Thax, serving as Varak's fleet commander, was troubled as he watched the rebel forces deploy. The tactical situation was not what he had expected. The rebels had more ships than intelligence had suggested, and they were displaying a level of coordination that should have been impossible for such a diverse force. "How many ships are we facing?" he asked his aide. "Approximately 800. "Vessels, sir? But most of them are converted civilian craft or outdated military ships." Thax was not reassured. He had learned to respect the rebels' ability to turn weakness into strength. "Begin the attack. All ships advance on the inner system." The final battle began with a massive exchange of fire as the two fleets closed distance. The Council's ships were larger and more heavily armed, but the rebels had learned to use their numbers and maneuverability to offset that advantage. The space around Earth became a chaotic battlefield. Fighters darted between capital ships, striking at weak points and communication arrays. Heavy cruisers dueled with dreadnoughts, their weapons lighting up the darkness. Everywhere, the desperate courage of the rebels faced off against the disciplined power of the Council. Dr. Williams, who had survived the destruction of her laboratory and now commanded Earth's orbital defenses, watched as the battle unfolded. The humans had spent 2 years preparing for this moment, building new weapons and defenses. But she knew that technology alone would not win this fight. "Activate the quantum resonance array," she ordered. The weapon that emerged from Earth's orbital platforms was unlike anything that had been used before. Instead of trying to destroy the Council ships directly, it disrupted their communication and navigation systems. Suddenly, the Council's coordinated attack became a confused melee as ships lost contact with their commanders. General Thax felt his flagship shudder as the quantum pulse struck his fleet. Around him, officers struggled to re-establish communication with their ships. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Some kind of interference, sir. Our ships can't coordinate properly. They're fighting individually instead of as a fleet." It was exactly what the rebels had hoped for. The Council's strength had always been their ability to coordinate massive fleets through rigid command structures. Without that coordination, their ships were powerful but isolated. The tide of battle began to turn. Human fighters, coordinated by Yulani communication specialists, struck at the confused Council ships. Vorthic assault vessels rammed damaged enemies, their crews singing ancient mining songs as they charged. Calthani ships used their superior speed to outmaneuver the heavy Council dreadnoughts. President Carter, now leading a united Earth government that included representatives from allied species, watched the battle from the secure command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. Beside him stood leaders from across the galaxy, species that had once been enemies now united in their fight for freedom. "The outer defense line is holding," reported General Foster. "But the Council's main force is pushing through toward the planet." The critical moment came when High Chancellor Vorak himself led a final assault on Earth's orbital defenses. His flagship, accompanied by the last intact Council squadrons, broke through the rebel lines and began bombarding the planet's surface. But the rebels had one more surprise. Admiral Hayes, commanding from his orbital station, had been waiting for this moment. "All ships execute Operation Freedom," he broadcast. The response was immediate and devastating. Every rebel ship in the system converged on Vorak's flagship. It was a coordinated assault that would have been impossible without 2 years of learning to fight together. Captain Reynolds led the attack, his mixed squadron striking at the dreadnought's engines. Morik's Calthani ships targeted the weapon systems. Grun's son, now commanding a Vorthak heavy cruiser, rammed the ship's command section with his vessel. The Eternal Dominion, symbol of Council power for over a century, began to break apart under the combined assault. Vorak's last transmission was defiant. "You may destroy us, but order will return to the galaxy." But his words fell on deaf ears. The Council's fleet was shattered, their leadership dead or captured. The 1,000-year empire that had ruled through fear and oppression was finally broken. In the aftermath of the battle, representatives from across the galaxy gathered on Earth to establish a new order. The Alliance of Free Worlds was born not from conquest but from cooperation, not from fear, but from hope. Ambassador Torres, representing Earth at the founding ceremony, looked out at the assembled delegates. There were humans, Calthani, Vorthak, Yulani, and dozens of other species, all working together to build something better than what they had destroyed. "We didn't fight just to defeat the Council," she said in her address to the gathering. "We fought to prove that intelligent beings could choose their own destiny, that no one has the right to enslave another, that freedom is worth any price." The applause that followed came from 100 different species, but it carried the same message. Never again would the galaxy bow to tyranny. Years passed, and the scars of war slowly healed. On worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, children played freely in the sunlight. Former enemies worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. The rigid hierarchies of the Council were replaced by councils where every species had a voice. Earth, which had once stood alone against impossible odds, now served as the capital of an alliance that spanned the galaxy. The humans who had refused to kneel had shown others how to stand. The flames that had consumed the old order had given birth to something new and beautiful. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what humanity had intended.